We just wanted to get a sense for who's on the call. We, of course, don't have time for introductions with such a short session, but we are also experimenting with some polling on Zoom, and just wanted to get a sense for who's on the call. So I'm going to ask Chang from Learns, if she can put up that poll about which sector you work on, just to see who's in the room and what the spread is across the missions portfolio. So give it a minute and we'll get that up there. So you should see a poll now. So we wanted to get a sense for which sectors are represented on the webinar, and these are the different areas of work for USAID Vietnam and partners. So if you could just quickly select which area, we'll get a sense for who's on the call. Okay, and Chang, I'll rely on you to share the results so people can see the different sectors represented on the call.
Okay, so I'm going to end the polling now and share this result with you all. We have, yeah, 81% voted. How about the 20% other?
Okay. It's all right. It's our first poll. So we'll show you the results, and while Chang's getting that up, I just want to, and here it is. Okay, so we've got quite a spread actually. In terms of the missions portfolio, so that's great. So we're seeing a lot of different sectors represented on the call, highest in terms of health and environment and energy, but also a nice spread across the others. All right, so this just gives you a sense for who's on. Thank you, Chang. And I want to turn over now to Anne-Marie. Let me see if I can switch my slide. There we go. So over to Anne-Marie Astishak. She's the mission director for USAID Vietnam, to give us some welcome remarks.
Thanks, Mona Lisa. Good morning, all of our partners and USAID staff that are joining this morning. I first want to just say thank you to Chris in our program office for really kicking this off and working with Learns to organize this little mini workshop this morning. Really what we've been trying to do, and as you may have heard at the partners meeting this week, is that we are trying to increase our collaboration early on in the process with the government of Vietnam, and then carry that through our activities, whether it's the design phase, the procurement phase, the now the work plan phase. It really helps us build that partnership with the government, as well as have
recording in progress,
own the process, as well as be a part of the projects that are implemented here in Vietnam. So really, this effective collaboration with the GVN in their work planning, in our work planning, and throughout the implementation really helps us ensure that we're lockstep and committed to shared objectives to our programs. So again, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to do this, Learns, of course, and of course our program office for really thinking this through and putting it together. But I also want to thank Winrock International, Brian Bean, and PAF, Kimberly Green, for sharing your experience with us. And I really think that really having the opportunity to hear from people who have used this process to collaborate is going to help all of us to really get on the same page and work more in lockstep with the government. So with that, I really want to say again, just thank you. I think we have a lot to learn from each other. I hope there'll be really great questions and exchange of ideas, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all the stuff that you're all doing. And again, thank you. And I'll turn it back over to you, Mona Lisa.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie. Okay, so just before we dive in, some quick online logistics. We are experimenting a little bit with Zoom webinar mode, which is a little different than normal Zoom. So I wanted to give you a heads up on that. One of the benefits of a webinar Zoom is we're actually also experimenting with live streaming this conversation on the closed Facebook group for monitoring, evaluation, learning officers that Learns also helps facilitate and create it on Facebook. So we're just experimenting with different modes, and you saw the recording message come up, and so we do want to also have this saved for other implementing partners who maybe couldn't come, and we'll share the recording after as well. So in terms of some online logistics, especially when you're speaking, if you can turn your camera on so that we can see you and you can share which implementing partner you're from, that would be great. Please, I think you all are already doing this. Please mute your mic when you're not speaking, as that can create some background noise. And one of the things with webinar mode that's different is that there's two different ways to communicate. So if you have questions on the content you're hearing, please use what you see at the bottom, the Q&A. If you just want to have general comments or reactions, you can use the chat, which is like in normal Zoom. So we want to keep the Q&A for questions because we use that to make sure we get to your questions as we go through the content of this. And as always, reach out to the username Vietnam Learns if you have any issues. That's Chang, whose voice you heard earlier. So just let us know if you need anything. All right, so with that, we'll get into the topic of the day. So of course, in terms of collaborative work planning with the government of Vietnam, in general, this falls under the collaborating portion of the Collaborating Learning and Adapting Framework. If you haven't seen this framework before, it was created by USAID to try and address some of the challenges that are faced in, the common challenges that are faced in development programming. And in this case, when it comes to collaborating, some of those common challenges are not getting enough buy-in for activities from local stakeholders, and just working at cross purposes or having duplication of efforts. So the collaborating piece, the intentional collaboration, is really meant to overcome some of those common challenges. And as you can see here, the idea here is not to collaborate with more people more often necessarily. The point is to be strategic and think about who you need to collaborate with and why. So in this case, we're talking about Government of Vietnam counterparts for the purpose of work planning. But even in that situation, collaboration can look very different. And so I'll cover some forms of collaboration for you to consider. So I think we all are on the same page when we get to why we need to collaborate. And this relates to some of the challenges I was mentioning that the CLA approaches are meant to help overcome in some ways. So getting that buy-in to achieve results and increasing the likelihood of sustainability. But also there are some other points there that maybe not at the top of the list, but seeing where you can leverage local resources. Again, that point about avoiding duplication or working at cross purposes. You can also use collaboration to leverage the social capital and the relationships of the government of Vietnam with other stakeholders in the government or other stakeholders in society in general. You can also learn from government of Vietnam's experience of doing similar programs or approaches from the past to avoid those challenges in the future. And also in this case with collaborative work planning, it really is about trying to also create a sense of team between USAID and the implementing partner and the government of Vietnam especially. And so all of this, of course, in the service of better development results. So with that said, one of the things that Brian and Kimberly and I were talking about in preparing for this is that it's actually not one size fits all when it comes to what forms collaboration can take. And so when I was mentioning about this idea that USAID promotes being very strategic in how you think about collaborating, in the CLA training that we created a few years ago for USAID staff, we focused on different forms of collaboration. And I think it's good just to consider what form of collaboration maybe you're currently doing, and maybe which form you aspire to as you go forward in terms of work planning and just your general relationship with the government of Vietnam. So I'll quickly go over these, and we have a poll for you about these forms of collaboration that Cheng can get ready. But so at the kind of minimal level of effort, you have just basic information exchange. And that's just what it sounds, just basic sharing of information. There's also this idea of convening as a form of collaboration. So this is where USAID and its partners can use their convening power to bring different elements of the government of Vietnam, or with other stakeholders like private sector and civil society, together to create a space for them to collaborate with each other. You also have where most people tend to be in general is consultation. So that's really an as-needed interaction on a specific document or process to get input, advice, that kind of thing. As you kind of move up in terms of the level of effort and the power distribution, you see the forms of collaboration at the top. So coordination is really not just consulting with others, but figuring out how are we going to align our efforts and make sure that we don't work at cross purposes and that we don't duplicate efforts. So you're having more of an engagement in order to do that. And then as you get into partnership, where a lot of you might be, you have a more formal, longer term interaction based on shared goals and resource contributions. And then you have this joint ownership idea where you're really co-designing and co-implementing together. So that again is a bit of a higher level of effort, of course, and it also is more of a distributed power between the stakeholders in a collaboration. So wanted to give you these forms of collaboration just as a starting point for your thinking. And when Brian and Kimberly share their experience, they'll share with you where they see themselves in their process in collaborating with the government of Vietnam on work planning. So Cheng, could you get up the poll on just to get a reaction from you all on what form of collaboration you think makes sense for your activities, work planning with the government of Vietnam. And as Cheng's getting that poll up, I'll go back here so you can see the definitions again and what types of collaboration. Thank you, Cheng. So you should see the poll now on your screen. We'll give you just a second to answer that question and close the poll in a few seconds. All right, Cheng, I think you can go ahead and close the poll and we'll see what results come in.
So we have 70% of people voted. Okay, that's good to go.
Yep, great. Okay, so and it looks like then I can tell from the results people chose multiple forms, which is okay. Looks like most people are at least aiming for the partnership level, which is great. So partnership, a more formal, longer term interaction. But also it's a big spread in terms of the different forms that you're thinking of taking when it comes to your work planning. So maybe as we go through the examples, you can think about if that form of collaboration should change based on what you're hearing. And one thing about this that Kimberly pointed out when we were talking about it is this is not a static. The form of collaboration you take is not static. So when you're in activity startup, it might be more of the consultation mode or even information exchange because the relationship isn't as strong yet. But as the activity goes on, you might actually be working towards higher levels of collaboration like partnership or joint ownership. Okay, awesome. Thank you for answering the poll. Okay. So one thing I just wanted to mention, because we did ask you for feedback to inform this session and we took it into consideration, but I wanted to just summarize for you what we got in that survey that we sent out with the invitation. So some challenges we heard from you that hopefully Brian and Kimberly can will touch on to some extent in their discussion. But if we don't get to these questions or you have further questions, we can please put them in the Q&A and we can touch on them for sure. So the three key themes that came from your survey responses were the first one is about aligning priorities and timeframes. So you've experienced situations where the government of Vietnam proposes ideas that you cannot accommodate, or it's difficult to reach consensus on final priorities. Another interesting point that someone raised was this issue of the government of Vietnam and USAID operating on different fiscal years and the challenge that can create for planning. The second one that came out was about, I bucketed it under logistics, but it's also a bit more than that. So it's the time, getting the government of Vietnam's time and willingness to collaborate is a hurdle for some of you. And then there can be delays from their side in terms of reviewing documents and moving forward on things. And right now we're in the moment of the challenge of working remotely, as we're all doing right now. And so that can be a bit more challenging, as some government of Vietnam counterparts might not be as interested in remote work as others. And then we've got the third challenge that was raised in terms of when you're work planning, you may be aligned with your specific managing agency, but that there are other GVN bodies or agencies that are important for for the success of your activity. And it can be difficult to actually have them all aligned and collaborate with all those different bodies or actors within the government of Vietnam system. So those were some highlights that we saw. Again, Brian and Kimberly will hopefully touch on a few of these, but if we don't get to them, please feel free to share your experience when we get there, or just ask questions about that as we go. Okay, so now I wanted to turn over to Brian Bean, who was the chief of party of Vietnam Forests and Deltas, which just recently ended. And we came to know about his experience because of his CLA case competition entry, so that was great. And so as you're listening, please note any questions you have in the Q&A function on Zoom. I'll be looking at those now and make sure that we cover questions. We'll have about 10 minutes after both Brian and Kimberly share, so we might not get to all the questions, but we can try and get to as many as we can. And then also use that chat function if you want to share your experience. If something that they share, rings true in your experience, or if you've had a completely different experience, it'd be interesting to hear that as well. Okay, so over to Brian.
Thanks, Mona Lisa. Quick audio check. You guys hear me okay? All right. Thanks, Mona Lisa, and good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be able to try to share some of our experience. I really liked what Anne-Marie said about how these are a chance for these type of webinars and discussions are a chance for all of us to learn from each other. Our project started way back in 2012, and there weren't nearly as many projects and as many opportunities to kind of learn from what each other was doing. And so this is a great chance for not just us, but for hopefully everyone to be able to share some ideas and see how we together can improve this process of work planning with government counterparts. So as I mentioned, we started way back in 2012, which feels like quite a long time ago. And our big challenge as one of the first big USAID funded programs in Vietnam, and specifically the first large USAID funded program working with the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, or MARD, was how to come up with a project management process that could harmonize the USAID and the government of Vietnam requirements and expectations. There had been quite a few ODA projects working with MARD and with government of Vietnam counterparts, but they work with a very different modality than USAID. Most of our government counterparts, as many of you have experienced, are used to managing the funds directly. And so that was our first big challenge. How can we figure out how to meet the expectations and requirements of this Government of Vietnam ODA ODA project system, while also maintaining kind of our role as an implementing partner of USAID and make sure we follow those guidelines and expectations. This is actually a photo of myself and our counterpart from MARD in the forest, and I think is later in our relationship and reflects how we got to a positive point of this joint ownership. And so that was where we fall on that little matrix that Mona Lisa shared. We were pretty far towards the top left in terms of working together, identifying the priorities, monitoring the activities, and also evaluating and reporting to our respective streams of reporting. So next slide, please. So how did we do this? In order to really make it clear for ourselves and for our partners, we came up with a very structured co-management structure. And as you can see from the top down, it sort of ran in parallel. On one side, we had the USAID processes in terms of monitoring, reporting, evaluation. And on the right side was the Government of Vietnam requirements and organizations. So at the top, at the highest level, USAID had been building this relationship with the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. And as the project began, Winrock International is the implementing partner, and one specific office within MARD was identified as the project owner. For the day-to-day operation of the project, we focused on the most important part of this graphic is the next level down, how the VFD project office based in Hanoi worked with our central program management unit. And that main connection was not just for work planning, but throughout the entire program. How did we identify those priorities? How did we monitor activities? And how did we together figure out how we needed to reconfigure any activities or plans based on challenges we had? One thing that was unique about our work is that we had an additional level down at the bottom that was focused at the provincial level. So we had 4 provinces that we focused in, and each of those provinces had a provincial program management unit, or PPMU. And that was a way to bring in not just counterparts from the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, but some of these other government and local agencies that wanted to have a voice and were stakeholders in the process. So this structure really became like our guiding principles of how we would work together. And actually, in the end, I had several different name cards. One says Chief of Party, but within the Government of Vietnam system, I was considered a co-director, and my counterpart was co-director, and that reflected this joint ownership approach. Next slide, please. This last slide that I'll share, I'm not going to obviously go through and read it all to you, but this is just an additional level of detail that we had in our project implementation manual that we developed with our counterparts, focused specifically on work planning. And so this is our topic of discussion today. And so I wanted to just share a few key points from this framework, this matrix that we followed as a team with our government counterparts every year as we went through the work planning process. I circled 2 little spots to highlight. One is the top line of who is responsible. And one of the key themes there as you move from left to right is you can see that it started each year with the provinces. And the provinces were the ones who would identify their specific priorities, their specific activities that they wanted to focus on. And then moving through the process of refining, consolidating, and ultimately finalizing that work plan is where our project team would work closely with our national level CPMU government counterparts to make those final decisions about what was most appropriate, what would help us reach our goals, both from the government goals, but also again, our USAID goals and USAID indicators. And then also the bottom line I'd like to highlight, because there were some questions about timing. We were quite fortunate through building this relationship with our government partners. This timeline here focuses on getting a work plan complete that we could submit to USAID based on the US government fiscal year. However, once that work plan was approved by USAID, usually around September or October, we would then work with the government counterparts to start the process from their end to get their government of Vietnam approval for the work plan as well. And so there was a little bit of a gray area in terms of how our government partners were able to sort of finesse that work plan that we developed to also serve as the annual calendar year work plan for the government of Vietnam. And so that was a little bit of an art more than a science. One or two last points to highlight before I turn it over to Kimberly is there were some questions about, you know, what were some of the sticking points and what were some of the challenges? And I think one thing that we would highlight here, the challenge, especially in the early years, was working with provincial partners who often identified priorities that were not necessarily in line with the project goals and project objectives. And while that was, I think, a real strength of the project design in terms of being really bottom up and focusing on priorities that came from our government counterparts, it took several years before we were really able to get in sync with that mindset of let's focus on what are the key goals of the project and what activities should we focus on in order to meet those goals. One of the key champions in that process became our central program management unit. Our government counterparts to the national level really helped us move that forward and make sure that the provinces were focused. So maybe I'll stop there for now and finish up with one closing thought of what was really important in this whole process of work planning. And I think the simple answer is that the most important part for us was that relationship and the relationship building and spending time, as Mona Lisa said, you know, CLA, be intentional, being very intentional in how we spent time building that relationship with our government counterparts, our CPMU, not just for getting short tasks done, but making sure they also bought into this vision of how the work plan should meet ultimately the priorities of both USAID and GVN. And once we had that relationship and that shared vision, that's when we were able to get the work plan process done a bit more effectively. So I'll close off there with our one example. And I think one of the great opportunities of today is hearing different examples, different perspectives. And I would like to hand it over to Dr. Kimberly Green from PATH, whose Healthy Markets Project has some outstanding experience that has a slightly different perspective than ours. So Kim, over to you.
Thanks so much, Brian. Yes, so the Healthy Markets Project is more focused on partnership, really around shared goals and decision making. So the USAID PATH Healthy Markets Project was initiated in 2014, and the goal was to partner with the Ministry of Health, and in particular, the Vietnam Administration for HIV/AIDS Control, as well as a wide range of private sector partners and community-based organizations to foster innovation, new and creative approaches to addressing HIV in Vietnam, and help Vietnam to achieve its goal of ending AIDS by 2030, but also focused on domestic financing. Next slide, please. So with this shared mission with the Ministry of Health and with the VAC, we had a different structure than what Brian articulated. So USAID PATH Healthy Markets is not ODA. So there's no PMU, there's no official structure which is defined, cross-defined between the government of Vietnam and the US government. So instead, what was really important for this technical assistance project was to focus on a series of MOUs with the Ministry of Health and with the VAC, but also MOUs with other government counterparts, including those at the provincial level, because this project focused both nationally and with specific geographies that were the hardest hit by HIV. So these MOUs have really been so important in defining the cross-partnership and the roles and responsibilities, very clearly articulating those, as well as milestones and metrics. As with all projects, and of course with the government of Vietnam, being dynamic and with priorities changing, it was very critical to regularly update these MOUs to reflect the changing nature of the partnership. So with these MOUs, they then laid the foundation for a cycle of partnership. So you can see here an iterative process. We have formal meetings with our government counterparts within the VAC, and that includes the director of the VAC, all of the sub-directors of different departments, and their technical staff. So the VAC is very committed to these quarterly meetings. And what we do in them depends on where we are within project cycle and work planning. So that can either be in Q1, just really recapping the annual plan and reviewing progress and challenges, to a more routine meeting at Q2, which is really just reviewing progress and really importantly discussing challenges. These meetings are where we have a formal conversation around any key challenges that's being faced and where we come up with solutions and then move those forward post-meeting. For the Q3 meeting, this is really essential for us talking about joint work planning. So we do this at the national level, and as Brian also talked about, we have another layer with the provincial partners. So we're doing this at the same time, iteratively, developing the national and provincial work plans, and then finalizing that joint work plan with the VAC and with our provincial partners. And those are linked work plans together. In addition to working with the VAC, we also work with the legal department. Part of what we do is we support the VAC in advancing key legal laws or policies that will further enable the HIV response and domestic financing and the role of the private sector. And so it's been very important for our team to play a communication role and to support strong relationships between those two departments. And we've been successful at doing that. So, one of the things that I would recommend is it's really important to find champions and allies within the government department that you're working with who have a shared value or shared mission around the work, and really defining in that Venn diagram, defining that intersection of where the project is really supporting the government of Vietnam counterpart in achieving their overall aims and goals. And that is the most fundamental part of a partnership relationship. I want to talk a little bit about some key challenges. So obviously COVID has been really difficult on many levels. And that's meant that, for Vietnam, we've been luckier than in other countries where there have been moments of calm. So we have moved very quickly where there are those moments to set up meetings and have those conversations with government counterparts. And then when that's not possible, we have significantly leaned into virtual interactions, which of course is not ideal, but it's an important way to maintain connection. And the last point I just really want to emphasize, it's one that Brian also brought up. Underlying all of this partnership is the relationship, and it's personal relationships. It's relationships between your team and your government counterparts, and establishing trust and accountability with those counterparts. And I think with that, it's very possible to further expand the impact that the project can have in supporting GOV in its mission around governance and other objectives. So thanks, and back over to you, Mona Lisa.
Thank you so much, Kimberly and Brian. I think it's so interesting to see how intentional both of you have been in terms of how to collaborate and what to do when and with who. So that's really awesome. I heard in the chat that some of you are having an issue with the Q&A function, so not to worry, just let's use the chat to overcome that, because we want to make sure we get your questions. And on your last point, Kimberly, about the importance of the relationship, I'll actually start there with the first question for either of you to discuss. But the question was, could you share your practices, maybe specific things you've been doing to really help build that relationship with the GVN agencies?
You want to go first, Brian?
Sure. I think it's like any kind of relationship. I mean, there's no one silver bullet or no best way to do it. And I think a lot of it is just putting in the time. For us, particularly with our government counterparts, it was time not just in meetings but outside of meetings. Working in Vietnam often involves a lot of time outside of working hours, And that's a time when you get to know the counterparts a little bit more on that personal level. As Kimberly said, I mean, the relationships come down to people. And so finding time to make those types of opportunities to have discussions, not just about, a work plan, but getting to know each other is extremely helpful. And then the other thing is just that I think for us, again, what we really saw was that over time, the relationships really helped from us with our main government counterparts, but then also helping with the government to government relationship. So from the central level down to the provinces. So when the provinces would come up with ideas that weren't quite in line with what we were trying to do, oftentimes by the time we got to year 7, 8, 9, or even before that, it was those central government counterparts, their strong relationship with the provinces that helped us. If we got stuck with a province, then the central government could come in, and also USAID. That was a really, really important part for us. We had a very strong AOR who was very closely connected and communicating with our government counterparts, and that was a huge benefit to us as well. So it wasn't just one relationship, but it was coming from all these different sides.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Do you want to add anything, Kimberly?
Yeah, I fully endorse everything Brian said. I think that identifying where are the right places to meet more informally with government counterparts can be really important. Some of our counterparts, they like to do lunch, and that's just a more kind of easy environment to talk about work, but not just work. Talk about our personal lives and just connect as people. So I think identifying the right way to connect with different counterparts is really important, and then honoring that and making time, as Brian said, to do that. You have to commit to the time. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And we have a whopping 130 people on this webinar, which we weren't expecting. So I hope to get a few more questions come in. We have a few more minutes for questions. So let me go to the next one, and this seems to be more specifically for Brian. Brian, did MARD accept VFD working in the provinces since the beginning? Were the provinces able to really develop a work plan based on the bottom-up approach? And what were the specific challenges and solutions? And why did it take several years to build up the relationship? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, and this is like a whole book you could write about this stuff. So I'll try to answer it shortly. The first question is the easiest. So MARD and USAID and VFD, one of our first tasks as a team was to identify which provinces we would work in. And so the first months of the project were identifying which provinces and agreeing on which provinces should be focused on, and developing those provincial PPMUs. So that was an agreement that we had in place with our government counterparts from the very beginning. The second part about, were the provinces really able to develop a work plan? Yes, in that with the understanding that the work plan, particularly early on, was less of a plan and more of a list of activities, and that was based on, again, priorities that provinces identified, and we would talk about how they could link into larger goals and larger results that would help both the province and our project achieve the impact that we were looking for. The challenges with that were often that we were a climate change program, and province X said, we really need help training our fishermen on navigation. And we would say, well, that's very important, but not really something we could do. And that's where this type of negotiation and discussion would take place over those months of work planning. And then to the last part, why did it take several years to build up the relationship? I mean, I think it can't be understated that, especially even now, but especially as our project was starting, we were one of the first projects where the government of Vietnam, who needed to approve an ODA program, wasn't getting control of the funds, and that created all sorts of challenges. And it took time to build the trust that we, as the implementing partner, weren't just making that up as a story because we wanted to keep the money for ourselves, but that was a USAID procedure and policy that we had to follow. So it was a very, very different way of working for our government counterparts. And so that just takes time both to build the trust about that basic principle, but then it takes several years to show results, positive results can come out of those activities. And once you get the results, we had several government partners, individuals who started getting promotions based on the success of the project. They felt very confident. That gave them benefits that weren't necessarily financial or other types of benefits they would usually get. And once they saw those benefits coming, that's when we were able to go much faster and much more effectively.
Thanks, Brian. And it's worth noting, I mean, VFD was in existence for even over 5 years. I think Healthy Markets, you're also past the 5-year mark. So these are long-standing relationships that have been built over time. So it's not to say, especially if you're starting your activity or have started recently, it may just be, this is about thinking about what you want to get to and what can you set in place now to help you get there as well. So we've got a few different questions coming in. I want to take this last one, which I think is super interesting when it comes to work planning and just good development programming in general. And maybe Kimberly, you can start with this one. We find that our counterparts tend to focus on outputs, events, or reports rather than outcomes, rule changes, or behavior changes. How have you tried to address that in work planning? And I guess first, Kimberly, have you faced that? If not, if Brian has, but let me start with Kimberly.
Yeah, a little bit, and definitely in the earlier years of the project. I think that where we were able to align with GOV goals, which are focused on outcome and goal level, right, and really mapping to where certain actions would lead to accelerating achievement of those outcomes or goals, that we could then align around the overall pathway that we were on, and further flesh out or identify those outcomes together. Because by achieving those outcomes, that would lead to achieving GOV stated goals. And that was a win-win really all around. So that was a very important tactic for us. In addition, though, we're fortunate to have some focal points within the VAC who are very mission driven. They're very passionate about the work that they do, and they see the goal. And so, we also feel that way. And so we talk about impact, and we regularly share data and results that we can collectively get excited about. And related to that, we then also find opportunities to celebrate GOV leaders in that work within Vietnam and internationally. So they're recognized for their leadership in achieving these outcomes and goals. Thanks, and over to you, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually one of my personal challenges that I've been struggling with in my time working here, because yes, I totally see, particularly down at the provincial level, our government counterparts are 100% often focused on outputs. Did we have a training? How many people showed up? Then it was successful because we had a training. Did we finish a new policy? Yes, we were successful because we finished the policy. And that's something that we have tried to set, as Kimberly mentioned, sort of longer term visions, and share that vision between our government counterparts, our team, and our USAID colleagues as well. It doesn't always show up in a USAID MEL plan. It doesn't always show up in a Government of Vietnam longer term strategy, but I don't have a magic solution to that one yet, but it's something we've always strived with because it is a tremendous challenge working.
Thank you both. I heard from Chang that Bruce Gelband, who's the head of the Office of Acquisitions and Assistance, raised his hand. Bruce, do you want to come off mute and either share your question or comment?
Sure. Thanks. And this is a very exciting. I really appreciate hearing the experience from a couple of our well-seasoned partners. Just to say that there's been a real sea change in how USAID is laying the foundation for very positive partnerships with our counterparts, both in the design phase and in the procurement phase with the SAVES. And I hope that that will propel our relationships with our counterparts and make them even more fruitful. And just one point that I I wanted to mention is that to think of the award itself as the starting point for our relationship between USAID and our implementing partners. So for instance, in the example that Brian gave where there was a disconnect in terms of the timing of the work planning process, that's something that, when confronted with an issue like that, consider coming into USAID and asking us to be flexible and change the timing of the USAID work planning process. Challenge us to come up with some solutions to your problems in working with our counterparts, and we'd be glad to engage and take on those issues. So thank you.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks for that openness. There's a couple of questions about VAT and project approval. I'm going to put those on hold for now and focus more on the work planning questions. One thing though, it's a comment that I'm going to turn into a question. Somebody was writing that, if it takes several years to build the relationship, then that can be difficult for a project that lasts only 3 to 4 years. So I'm wondering what you both would recommend, what you did early, let's say, to create a stronger relationship, and what you would recommend if somebody's in that situation where they have a shorter time frame to work with.
Maybe I'll go first, Kim, real quick. Just one clarification. I think it's I wouldn't say that for the, if we say took several years to build the relationship, it wasn't to say that for those first 3 years it was a disaster and nobody talked to each other and we had no relationship. It was that, at least in our case, when we think about work planning, for example, the first couple years were quite challenging because we're all figuring out how to do this together. And it was by that third, fourth year when suddenly, we had USAID, we had our home office folks come in saying, oh, that was a heck of a lot easier this year. And so that's just wanted to clarify that it wasn't that there was no relationship. It was that it took several years to get things really, really humming, really moving well. And so I think, again, there's no secret solution for those first years. It's that our team, not just at the project leadership level, but our staff, at technical staff who are working directly with counterparts, our M&E staff who were trying to get in place systems that needed inputs from our government counterparts, all of our team really trying to focus on building those individual relationships so that when we went into these meetings, everyone was prepared, everyone was kind of focused on how to make things work, and we were moving past some disagreements into solutions.
Marley, did you want to add anything there?
I just wanted to say that agree fully that the relationship also for USAID Path Healthy Markets didn't start off in a particularly bad place, but has matured over time. And I think that's to be expected when you're really invested in the relationship. But from the very beginning, we prioritized the relationship. And so that meant we were having very frequent meetings at different levels of the VAC and with our provincial partners. But also, we requested to have formal focal points. So from the very beginning, we asked to have specific people who we would work together with within the VAC and our provincial partners. And so that first step was very important in having that official relationship, in addition to the MOUs and everything else that followed. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you both. And thank you both for sharing again. It's been so nice to hear your experience. And I really love all the questions coming in. And Gabriella, I would love to get to your question, but we need to move on. So what we'll do for the questions we didn't get to is get to you after. So we'll do a summary of this session and include some of the answers to those Q&As, including the ones on project approval and VAT that we didn't get to. But because we have so many people here on this call, I really want to capture your collective wisdom. You've all been working with the government of Vietnam on work planning and just in general, but we really specifically are thinking about work planning as we enter this work planning season, and that's why we focused on work planning for this session. So Chang just shared with you the Google Slides link. What I'd like for you to do is please open that link on your computer, and it should be fine to open. The sharing settings are open, so you should be fine to get in there. What we wanted to do is hear from you on your do's and don'ts for collaborating with the government on Vietnam for work planning, because you all have experience. So I'm going to ask, and I need to exit now the slide deck. I'm going to ask Brian and Kim just to, and I love, somebody is already in there. Thank you. Love that. So please, you can go to slides 21 to 25, and you'll see, pick any of those, we'll consolidate it later. But please start sharing your do's and don'ts that are really, that you want other partners to know, because what we'll do after this is also capture this in a nice one-pager so people have that as just lessons learned from our collective experience. So I want to kick us off though, Brian, if you could kick us off with one of your do this. Get going, and others please go in there. I see you in there now. Please add as we're talking. So Brian, what do you want to kick us off with on a do this?
So yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple do's that we always found helpful. The first was to figure out what are the benefits and incentives that the partners are trying to get out of this, because oftentimes those can be very much in sync with what the project goals are and what we as a team think we should be doing. Maybe there's a little way of finessing that, but once you can get some activities in there, some objectives in there that are in line with the government's goals and what those, again, those individuals and offices see as their incentives, that helps everything else move much more quickly. And then the second, again, is, as I think I've said this several times, another big do is to identify, Kim mentioned this as well, identify those champions that you're working with, because they can be the ones in the meetings and the work planning sessions who it's not just you always saying we should do this, we need to do this, this is our goal, but as they come in and can also help guide and steer things a bit, that's a big benefit, because it's not just coming from USAID or the implementing partner, but also from a government partner. And sometimes that can be a much stronger message for local government partners.
Awesome, thank you. Kim, why don't we start with you on the don'ts, actually?
Okay. I would say don't give up, be persistent. I think persistence really, really, really pays off. It really does in investing in that relationship. And be flexible. I think Bruce gave a wonderful message around finding ways to adapt to challenges that you might encounter in terms of government procedures or otherwise. So I think that creative thinking is really, really critical to coming to common understanding with GOV counterparts. And also don't lose contact with your government counterparts. We all get so busy, but it's so important to maintain that contact. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you both. I see many people in there. I love seeing all the typing happening. I'm just going to go ahead and look at maybe some of the other ones where we've seen from participants. So this focus here on building trust that we've talked about, managing expectations. I mean, that's a big part of this as well. Respect for government counterparts, of course. Sharing fully project information, so not having a close hold on some of the information so that they feel you're being transparent. I love the focus on letting the government bodies take ownership of the project. So how do you move towards that joint ownership level of collaboration is really important. Let's see, maybe another, was this the one I was in? Yes. So I was in this slide, but there's one from somebody else in here. So don't be afraid to ask counterparts what they are bringing to the table to make the activity a success. So again, that's helping get closer to that joint ownership where they're also actively contributing. Let's see another one. So don't request the government of Vietnam to contribute to the work plan development without sharing with them where we are and what we did, background. And actually, this is a really important point that, Brian, we were talking about ahead of time, and it relates also to what Kimberly shared, is that the work plan is not, in both cases, was not done in a vacuum. There was a very intentional reflection ahead of work planning to get everybody up to speed, to reflect on what you're learning from implementation, and then based on that, based on looking back, being able to look forward with the work plan. So that's a great point. And so in the next actually Mellow event for the MEL officers, although leadership is always welcome to attend, we're going to focus on pause and reflect and how to do that better. And that's a real critical input to effective work planning, I think. And also this, don't forget to give credit and acknowledgement. Very important, of course. So I love seeing all of you type in your ideas. We're near the end of time. Please keep inputting your ideas. We are going to capture this as your key learning and share it across the mission and implementing partners so that we have that. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on this topic as well. Okay, so we're headed into closeout of this session. I wanted to just briefly share some resources on collaboration, but also facilitation, which a lot of what you're doing when you pause and reflect and when you are doing collaborative work planning is a lot of facilitating people coming together. And so there's obviously the CLA toolkit on USAID Learning Lab. There's a section of the toolkit on engaging stakeholders. And in the slide deck, this is all linked, so it'll take you straight there. Some of my favorite facilitation ideas and resources that you can see there: Session Lab, Liberating Structures, Game Storming. So if you need ideas on how to do things more creatively so it's more engaging, those are some great places to look. There's also, if you want examples, there's the CLA case competition submissions, and you can search by CLA component, so you can look at collaboration. And if you have additional resources, please add them in the chat. I can add them to the slide deck after. Obviously, collaborating with the government of Vietnam on work planning is a very specific topic, so these are general resources. But if you have anything that's either general or specific to this topic, please share it in the chat and we can add it to the slide deck. Okay, so now we're at closing and wrap up. I want to turn over to Bradley Basayer for the closeout. He is the Deputy Mission Director. So we've been really blessed actually with really high level leadership from USAID, the Mission Director, the Deputy Mission Director, the head of the program office, the head of the OAA. So thank you all for joining. So over to Brad for closeout.
Thanks, Mona Lisa, and thank you everyone for joining and helping us work through these issues. I want to be the first to say that we're not naive enough to think we're going to solve everything, but I do think that we have enough success recently on a lot of issues that we can make some pretty good progress with project approval and with that. We've had some really exciting meetings in the past few weeks. I think we're trying to work with the government of Vietnam differently and engage with them differently and just try to be a lot more proactive based on a lot of the experiences you all have been saying. So one of the things that what we're trying to do is to understand how we can continue to work with you all and to really continue the great success we've been having. So thanks again for that. And this is also just last plug here that you've probably all heard in the partner meeting too, with Anne-Marie talking about, but we really are, setting up a partner unit and trying to support partners and, put partner back in partner and really have you all focus on the things that you were here to do, which is your various technical areas. And so this is just yet one of the other ways that we want to support you and make your lives easier so you can focus on doing all the great work that you're doing. So with that, I'll leave it and wish everyone a great weekend, and thanks again for everyone for contributing to what I think was a really awesome discussion. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Brad. The last thing, if you can, is, and Cheng will put this in the chat with the link, you can use the QR code on your phone. If you're on your computer, you could just go to the link. Just to get your feedback on the session. And also there's a question there about what topics you would like to cover in the future in these kind of sessions. So that's really helpful input to us. It's really exciting to see so many people participate in the session. So clearly it struck a chord and was relevant to you at this time. So we'd love to hear from you if there are other relevant topics. So with that, we'll close. Thank you all again. And please, we really, really appreciate your feedback so we can make these sessions useful in the future. And thanks again to Anne-Marie and Brad and Brian and Kimberly for sharing and for opening and closing for us today. I hope everyone has a good rest of the day, and we'll hopefully see you in person soon. Bye, everyone.